Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Rubén Hernández León, professor of sociology and director of the Latin American Institute at UCLA, and I want to welcome you to our event today, Uneven Terrains, Binational Children in Schools in Mexico and the United States. We have two presenters today, and before I introduce the first presenter and also yield the floor to Christian Zlolinski, editor of the journal Mexican Studies Estudios Mexicanos. I also want to acknowledge the support and participation of Veronica Zavala, who's the outreach coordinator of the Latin American Institute at UCLA. She will actually come in later in the event, and she will be in charge of handling the question and answer part of today's event. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you and also introduce my friend and colleague, Víctor Zúñiga. Víctor is professor of sociology at the School of Law at Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León in Monterrey, Mexico. He is a Tier 3 member of Mexico's Sistema Nacional de Investigadores, or SNI. That's the highest level in the SNI system. And he is the chief editor of the journal Tras Procesos Mexicanos y Centroamericanos. He is co-author with Silvia Giorguli of the book Niñas y Niños en la Migración de Estados Unidos a México, La Generación 0.5, published by El Colegio de México in 2019, which will be soon published by University of California Press. Dr. Zúñiga, Victor, as I call him, was awarded with the 2018 AERA Division G. Henry Trueba Award for research leading to the transformation of the social context of education. In 2021, he was inducted into the Kappa Delta Pi Laureate Chapter, a global community of the top 100 researchers in education. And before we actually have Victor present, I'm going to turn it to my also friend and colleague, Christian Zlolinski, who's the editor of the journal Mexican Studies Estudios Mexicanos. Christian.
Buenas tardes and welcome to this event. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. And I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Texas at Arlington, and also serve as an editor, as Rubén Hernández said, of the journal Mexican Studies Estudios Mexicanos. This is the second annual lecture that we co-sponsor. The journal publishes, it's a bilingual journal, actually publishes in the broad theme of Mexican studies, including history, humanities, and social sciences. And today, in light of, we thought that in light of increasing visibility and attention of issues about migration, including return migration, we wanted to invite two renowned scholars as the ones that we have this evening to tell us, to guide us about the barriers that immigrant children encounter to adapt to the educational systems in both Mexico and the US. So it's my pleasure to introduce our second presenter, Professor Tatiana Klein. Tatiana Klein is a professor of bilingual education at the SOL at the City College of New York. She's the principal investigator for the City University of New York Initiative on Immigration and Education. She served as president of a New York State Association for Bilingual Education and was also a Fulbright scholar in Oaxaca, Mexico. Tatiana has authored books and articles on immigration, bilingual education. In fact, her latest book is titled Living, Learning, and Languaging Across Borders, Students Between the US and Mexico. And here you can hopefully see the book. It just came out very recently. Tatiana has also worked in film as a producer and director, including the leading undocumented series, Una Vida, Dos Países, Children and Youth in Mexico, and the Supporting Immigrants in School video series. She was an elementary school teacher in San Pedro Sula in Honduras and Atlanta, Georgia. So welcome to both of our presenters. And now we give the floor to Víctor Zúñiga. Adelante, Víctor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our findings and research and other information we are getting from the students coming from the US to Mexico. The thing is, for starting this participation is we have hundreds or thousands of children who were living in the United States and now they are living in Mexico. The illusion of teachers and principals in the US schools and also in Mexican schools is the following. When people arrive to the United States, they do not move, they stay in the United States. This is a very important thing to communicate and to share, is children are circulating between the two countries. In fact, they are circulating in between the Central American countries, Mexico and the United States. Students are circulating. When we were talking about transnational students, we were talking about students who are moving from one school system to another school system. For explaining why there are hundreds or thousands of children of migrant child in Mexico, I need to talk about very quickly about a story of different periods of migration between Mexico and the United States. These periods, we defined them thanks to the information of children talking with us, instead of making periods taking into account the decision of the states or the governments or the law making laws, etc. We decided to describe, to talk about a story in 3 times described by children where they were talking about their families and their parents, etc. The first period was a period from 1940s to 1980s. In that period, we can talk about the children left behind. That means migration without family. We found in that period Mexicans participating in migratory flows, and they stayed a short periods in the United States while their families members remain in Mexico. The people participating in that kind of migration were youth adults and adults, male adults who worked in agricultural activities and other kind of employments in the United States. That period finished. The period is, I remember the title I decided to utilize for describing this period is migration without family, or the era of children left behind. At the end of the 1980s, a second period started. And the title we decided to utilize for describing that period is family reunification period in the United States. The divided families in the former period, divided families become family reunified in the United States. The household together in different parts and different regions in the United States. Why the number of families and Mexicans living in the United States jumped from 1 million, less than 1 million in 1970 to more than 12 million in 2005 in the United States, because the crossing border became harder. The number of people living in the United States, they decided to live and reside in the United States because the militarization of the border. Then this period of family reunification in the United States finished in about 2005, and the contemporary period we have is now the reunification of families in Mexico, because about 2005 started the period of criminalization of undocumented migrants. Deportation machines in the United States started their activities, and the public anti-immigrant scripts accelerated by the Great Recession of 2008-2009. So we are now in the period of family reunification in Mexico. As a result of this family reunification period, we estimated from the Mexican census in 2010-2015, the return migration from the US to Mexico was 1.5 million people. And from 2015 to 2020, we estimated 900,000 people. Those people moving from the US to Mexico are adults, mainly adults, but we have also 20% of minors. I mean, 0 to 17 years old people coming from the US to Mexico. About this population, children and adolescents, we have two kinds of population. The first one is children who were born in Mexico and then went to the US and then returned to Mexico. The second kind of children are those who were born in the United States and they came for the first time in their lives to Mexico. The second kind of child migrants, those who were born in the US, we can divide this population in two different types. The first type is those who had the experience of being educated in US schools and those who have not. The children who were born in the US and arrived to Mexico before the school age, so they have no experience of being matriculated in the US schools. Those who are more than 6, 7, 8 years old arriving to Mexico, they have the experience of being part of the U.S. school processes, and they arrive to Mexico. This kind of children are those who have the most complicated process, because they move from one school system to another school system. So we are now in this moment in Mexico having a great opportunity, and we have also facing big challenges. I'm going to read a little bit about the opportunities, because it's a special moment of the history of Mexico, because we have the opportunity for the Mexican society. We have a great opportunity for Mexican school system, and we have also a great opportunity for Mexican economy. The great opportunity for having hundreds of thousands of children and adolescents who were moved from the US to Mexico is they are bilingual. Most of them are bilingual. They can be bilingual. They are speaking English, and they are learning Spanish in Mexico. They will be bilingual if we support them, if we recognize them. But also they might be bicultural. They might be bicultural if we adopt an asset-based framing instead of deficit narratives. We need to recognize they are developing the Mexican cultures when they arrived to Mexico, and they were educated in the United States. Biculturalism is a very complicated process. People who are bicultural arrive to one society and seems to be at home, and they arrive to the other society and they feel to be at home. This is very difficult. When I arrived to the United States myself, I can navigate, but I feel that I am not at home. People who feel at home in both societies, they are bicultural. And finally, that is important, because a very important proportion of those children are binational. They are Mexicans and they are Americans also. This is the reason they are circulating. Now we are talking about circulation instead of moving from the US to Mexico, because they are arriving to a moment they can't decide as an adults, a young adults, deciding to live in Mexico, or deciding to live in the United States, or deciding to live in both countries. We are now observing this kind of process, and both societies, the US and the United States and Mexico, need to welcome this emerging phenomenon, because we are going to have people moving in both societies, and they have the right to move in both societies, in both countries, in both states. That is the kind of the story I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much. And before I yield the floor to Professor Tatiana Klein, I would like to also mention that the Q&A, again, the Q&A will be handled by Veronica Zavala, our outreach coordinator over here at UCLA. before that, the Q&A is going to be a bilingual Q&A, so you can ask your questions in Spanish or in English, whichever is your language of preference. So without further ado, Tatiana, if you want to come back in, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to be in the presence of Dr. Zúñiga, who's with his partners, Juan Sanchez and Ted Hammond, paved this work. And so I'm so happy to be here and to talk about kind of the other side, which is what happens when students come to the United States. Although I think Dr. Zúñiga really framed it for us from a binational perspective, but I want to kind of focus on the US perspective. So that's what I'm going to do for the next 15 minutes or so. So when a student comes to the US from Mexico, but I would say it's not specifically from Mexico, right? When a student comes specifically to the US without papers, from the US-Mexico border, there are a few things that can happen, and I put welcome to the USA as a question, because what has happened in recent history and continues to happen in different ways is that children are detained. During the Trump administration, they were separated from their parents, but children are still being detained as they're being held and processed at the southern border. Some students are, when they move to a certain place in the United States, they try to enroll in the school systems. And what they find, even though they're of age to attend and have all the rights to attend, is that schools do not want them. And this is especially with secondary students, and they are pushed out, right? Or they're not even welcomed in, because what administrators see because of the high stakes testing is students that are going to bring down the scores of the school, right? The test scores. So what they try to do is to get them to encourage them to go into programs that are like GED equivalent programs, so that they don't get the full education and all the supports that come with a secondary education in the United States. So that's something else students experience. I will say that some students that cross come, even though they're at minors, they come to work, right? They're already, like, their childhood is behind them in some ways. And then for some students, they are welcomed into our public school systems. And I want to kind of bring you into what happens when students do come into the schools. I want to break down the terrain of education in the US for Mexican origin students into two areas: K-12 education, which is more linear and clear and consistent across the nation, and then higher education, which is just all over the place, right? Every state has its own thing going on. So let's first look at K-12 education, and something that I hope that all educators know about in the United States is the Plyler versus Doe case. And that is a US Supreme Court decision that said undocumented students are entitled to the same free education that documented students receive in grades K to 12. So students cannot be turned away, and schools must accept all students who meet residency requirements. And by residency requirements, it's mostly like, do you live in the area, right? Like, sometimes it's like a gas bill or something very kind of that everyone has. Although not, if someone just moved, obviously they wouldn't have it. But anyways, all students must be accepted. So what that means, the implications are they must meet residency requirements, but schools cannot ask about a child's immigration status. Schools cannot ask about a social security number. Have there been pushes to bring down Plyler in some states? Yes, they have. They haven't succeeded, but they have created fear in certain communities and kept kids out of school. Are social security numbers still asked when students register for school? Yes, they are. But Plyler versus Doe is a federal mandate from the Supreme Court, and that stands across the nation. So hopefully once a student enters the school system, and hopefully once they are welcomed into the school system, most of them end up in public schools. And then within that, they have two types of programs that immigrant students must select, because assuming that they're not already fluent in English, right? But immigrant students who come even speaking some English, but not at a level that's deemed proficient, must either go into a TESOL program or a bilingual program. A bilingual program, like Dr. Zúñiga was saying, would prepare students for their binational realities and hopefully bicultural realities and feeling at home between the US and Mexico. Although I would say bilingual education is not enough, right? If we look at the students of Oaxaca, there's many indigenous languages that kind of are often erased. But most students are in English medium programs to learn English, and their home language, which is Spanish, but sometimes Zapoteco, Mixteco, are not even known about. So we do have some states where there's no bilingual education at all, some states where it has been outlawed. And then we also have within the field of bilingual education, a gentrification of bilingual education, specifically dual language bilingual programs where certain students are having access with who come from families of privilege, white families, upper middle class families, whereas immigrant origin students are being left out. We do then have immigrant focused schools within the US, but they're not very common. So some students may come to newcomer schools or sometimes programs that are just for a year that kind of orient them to what is it like to be in the US. I want to remind us that some of these students may be coming back to the US, right? Because it is so cyclical, but it basically acclimates them to what does it mean to be a student and a person in the United States. We also have the international networks for public schools, which are in a few states across the US, that only take newcomer immigrant high school students. And I think they've just branched out into middle schools. And those schools are really special because often in high schools, big high schools, immigrant students will fall through the cracks because they don't have the services they need. But at the internationals, every student is an immigrant and they kind of address immigration issues across the board to all the students. And so that's the internationals networks. And then there are some bilingual education, not programs, but schools. One that is especially close to my heart as I was a co-founder is Dos Puentes Elementary in Washington Heights in New York City. But these are schools, they're not immigrant schools, but they're schools where bilingualism is at the center. It's not some students are becoming bilingual and some aren't, or the bilingual program is viewed as remedial, even though it's enriching and the other program is not. So what you have is a community of students that are being raised up, that are being educated bilingually, biculturally, and I would say multilingually and multiculturally to the extent possible. So there's different types of schools that students will go into based on where they're living and what's available. Once they get into the school, Lau versus Nichols is the ruling that says that all students who are learning a language other than English must have access to bilingual education or TESOL, right? Because giving them the same education as somebody who speaks English is not equal, right? If you don't speak the language and I give you the same books and the same resources, it doesn't matter. You're not being educated properly. So what happens because of Lau versus Nichols is newly arrived immigrant students are generally labeled as English language learners. It used to be limited English proficient, which is just horrific, right? As soon as you cross a border, you're limited, right? Like if you don't speak English, you have a problem. You can speak 4 or 5 other languages, but that's how it's framed. We also talk about multilingual learners because a lot of our students come from countries where they speak multiple languages. English is not their second language, for example. So what we're doing is we're focusing these binational, transnational immigrant students, and we're just kind of narrowing in on their language learning and their language needs. Some students are also labeled as students with interrupted formal education if they've had their education paused because of war, because of different issues, global crises, because of what is the word? Issues of the environment, right? And often sometimes these students are refugee students, but we don't talk about them as immigrants. We don't talk about them as refugees. We talk about them as SIFE or English learners or multilingual learners. So we're just taking kind of a small part of who they are. So this is just a reminder that it's not just about, in parentheses, English language learning, but these students, as Dr. Zúñiga said, they bring a background, a strength-based if we take an assets-based approach, right, their background and strengths, we look at their experiences, they bring a wealth of cultural and linguistic practices. They bring knowledge of the immigration systems and policies that a lot of adults in both countries don't understand. And I would even say a lot of politicians don't understand, and these children understand better. They bring their hopes and their dreams, not only for themselves, but of their families, right? They feel a lot of pressure to fulfill those dreams. They also bring trauma, right, due to the migration process, which has become criminalized, crimmigration, right, where people are being stopped. As I started this presentation, children are being detained. And they're not just English language learners, they're math learners, they're science learners. With COVID, we all became technology learners, right? They're all the things. So we really need to kind of see them more holistically for the strengths that they bring. And I wanted to give you an example of the knowledge that they have about immigration systems and policies. I had one of the students in my study, she was 9 years old at the time, draw for me the difference between living in the US and Mexico. She was born in the US. I met her in Mexico. She's actually now back in the US. But on the right, that's in Mexico with the horses because her grandparents owned a farm. And on the left is her mom in the US who was helping her to ride a bike. And she wrote, yo quiero vivir con mi papá y mamá por todos los lados que vayan. Quiero que me ayude el gobierno. So here is a 9-year-old that understands that they cannot see both of their parents at the same time in the same place because the government will not allow them to. To me, that was really powerful. I didn't ask her to write anything. I just thought that, I just give kids a chance to draw. And when she kind of wrote that, it kind of blew me away. So that's the schools, but now let's look at the teachers. Are teachers in the United States prepared to teach immigrant students? No, they're not. Immigration is not a mandated topic in most teacher education curriculum. So again, especially for teachers, bilingual and TESOL teachers, the focus is on language and culture. And for teachers of math, for teachers of science, for teachers, who are not in bilingual and TESOL, sometimes these areas are not addressed at all, right? Maybe if an instructor has it's something they're passionate about and they think is important. However, so some educators do have personal immigrant experiences, but a singular experience does not bring about broad understandings, right? That is a singular experience and that's certainly valid, but the immigration experience is so complex that we really have to create spaces for educators to learn about what it means to immigrate, and then what it means not to just move from point A to point B, but to move from A to B back to A and then maybe to point D, right? So the reality is teachers are not prepared, yet they are confronted with immigration realities on a regular basis and have to struggle to figure out what to do, what to say, what not to say. So there's a big gap in the way that we prepare teachers to work with immigrant students. So, but I do want to say there's good things happening, right? I don't just want to paint this picture that like everything is horrible in K-12 in the US. No, there's great people doing great things. There's great children's literature. Arely is a Dreamer by Arely Morales. I'm a little partial to this book because Arely was one of my students and I'm so proud of her for this book. It's in English and Spanish, and it talks about her experiences growing up in the US, having been brought to the US when she was a baby, and then going to Mexico to meet her family because she's a DACA recipient as well. And all of that. There are teachers, this is Rebecca Madrigal from Dos Puentes Elementary School, that talk about issues of the wall and border patrol with first and second graders, right? They're not too young. So through the CUNY Initiative on Immigration and Education, we've created videos and professional development modules to kind of fill the gap because educators are not, again, taught about some of these issues. And then it's also being addressed in secondary school. There are dream teams that are being formed. These are clubs for that support immigrant justice, that are spaces safe or brave spaces for undocumented youth, for their allies, accomplices to come together and create a safe space. And the New York State Youth Leadership Council has led a lot of that work in New York City specifically. Through CUNY, we are working with the New York State Youth Leadership Council to pilot positions for immigrant liaisons in schools to push the New York City Department of Education, because in New York City, for example, schools have a parent liaison, which is great, which is somebody that works with families, supports them, sends resources. But with immigration issues, which are changing by the moment, unless a school may not have anyone that really understands these things, and therefore families, students don't get the right resources, don't get the right information, and getting the wrong information can change the path of your life's path, right? A high school student being told you can't go to college will change their life, as opposed to another educator that may know that you can go to college and you can get in-state tuition and you can even get financial aid that will drastically change the trajectory of a student. So these are things that are happening in secondary schools as well. So as you can see, it's a little bit more even in secondary school. And now I want to just share a little bit about what's happening in higher education. And what we have is, as opposed to a federal policy like Plyler versus Doe, higher education is mandated by state policies. So we have policies where the red states are, right? Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, where undocumented students are banned from applying to the public schools, the public colleges, right? And the private colleges, maybe they could apply, but anyone who knows about US college, how the pay system works is like, it's 3, 4, 5 times as much. So it's really prohibitive. So there's some states where undocumented students are completely banned. And what I found when I was in Mexico is a lot of those students are actually returning to Mexico to go to college, right? Because they don't have the opportunity, they've studied in the US, and so they return. And then what many of them I found ended up studying is to become English language teachers. And for some of them, that's a passion and something they've always wanted to do. But for others, they feel like their Spanish, because they weren't in bilingual programs, isn't developed enough, for example, to study architecture or to study nursing. So English language education is a place where they feel safe, right? But then on the flip side, we go to some of the green states, and I'm happy to say that a lot of these states are the states with the largest percentage of immigrant students, of Mexican origin students. And those are the states where you can pay in-state tuition, you can get financial aid. So there's a lot more opportunities. Now, the issue is for some students, what happens when you graduate, right? Some students will not be able to work, but a college degree is something no one can take away from you. It is something that you can use all over the world, right? It just doesn't have to be between the US and Mexico. There are opportunities elsewhere, but this is a patchwork and it is continually changing. And then there's additional federal and state challenges for immigrant college age students. So we have the deferred action for childhood arrivals. The average age right now of these students is, these people is 26. So most of them are not in college anymore, or at least in undergrad. They're definitely not in high school because it's no longer available to new applicants. So that's kind of going away, and that's going to create a huge impact for almost, I would say 800,000 people. Also, different states have different approaches to healthcare, to driver's licenses. I live in New York City, so I'm not too concerned about, driving. It's easier for us to get on the subway, hop on, hop off. But for somebody living in Ohio, right? If you don't have a driver's license and you need to go to school, then you need to go to work. That can take you like 3 hours to get 10, 15 miles waiting for public transit. So it's a real quality of life issue. Health insurance clearly is a quality of life issue, especially for people who are terminally ill. And I found that to be one of the reasons people also return to Mexico. Also, undocumented immigrants are always having to face racism in the United States, to face xenophobia, and to live under constant fear of being deported, right? We're no longer living under the Trump administration. Today is actually election night, so we're gonna see which direction our country is gonna go in. But under the Biden administration, deportations are still happening. It's just the language is not as strong, but the actions, the policies pretty much remain in place. And as we see with DACA are quite grave. So all that to say, these are the factors that set up the conditions for return. And return does not mean for always, right? Just return for a while and then kind of we'll see what happens. Return for families and students. So I just want to finish up with this this picture of this is as Christian talked about, the book that I just authored. And what I want to focus on is the picture on the bottom right. You see 3 children with their mother. They're in front of a church in La Cienega de Zimatlan. These 3 children were US born, came to Oaxaca with their mom, left their dad in the United States. And then fast forward 5 years later, so move over to the picture on the bottom left. Those are the same 3 children in New York City. They now live 20 minutes away from me and are, started in the US, went to Mexico, and are back in the United States Where their futures will take them, we don't know. But this is the reality of return migration, of cyclical migration. And this is the kind of lives that we need to prepare our students for. So students will continue to live across borders regardless of, and sometimes because of, national and transnational policies. And we can create the conditions for them to be successful in both countries and beyond, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take an asset-based framework. But I think we don't have a choice but to do this for our children, right? As Patricia Gandara and Bryant talk about the children that we share, los niños que compartimos. So I look forward to the dialogue, to the questions, and to being in dialogue with Dr. Zúñiga about how to continue this work. So I will stop there. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Tatiana, very much. Before we turn it to Veronica Zavala, we, meaning Christian and I, prepared a couple of questions just while we get our audience thinking about questions that they want to pose to our presenters. I'm going to read the first question for our presenters. What specific institutional mechanisms, initiatives, measures would you propose so that migrant children are welcome and have less disruptive transitions as they move between countries and educational systems? Tatiana already mentioned some things. I don't know if you want to start, Victor, with this question. And again, I invite our audience to start writing their questions through the Q&A function of the webinar.
Very quickly, Ruben, Christian, and Veronica. On the US side, on the US school side, the focus is language. They arrive, they don't speak English, so they become immediately English learners. And they continue being English learners for years and for years and for years. Some of them jump to the status of English speaker. A lot of students, they don't jump, never, to that status. So initiative is, those are the students we share. They are part of the school system in Mexico. They are part of the school systems in the US. I remember a short story in an elementary school of North Carolina, where there are the most important production of turkeys. Remember that the US people, American people, love turkeys. Yeah, I remember very well. So there are a big production of turkeys in this region, and the school, elementary school, has been transformed from a black and white students enrollment to a Mexican enrollment, about 60% of the school. And I was in the office of the principal, a young woman, very kind people. And I told her, some of those children, Mexican children in your school, probably they will be next year in Veracruz or Oaxaca or San Luis Potosí, probably. She was discovering something very surprising for her. And they took the microphone. You remember that in the school system, in the American schools, there are microphones to talk with everybody. So they took the microphone and said, it is prohibited to prohibit speaking Spanish in this school. She discovered that Spanish is a resource and English is a resource. To be bilingual it is not an ideal. It is a resource because they are moving, they are circulating in both societies. But in the Mexican side, I think the problem is the issue in the US schools is language. The issue in Mexican schools is that there are no issues. They do not exist. And that's a big problem because the first initiative we need to start is to say they exist. They speak English as a primary language. They were in the US schools. Another initiative, I will finish. Another initiative is to fill the gap, because we have transnational children, transnational students. Transnational means they transit from one school system to another school system. That's transitions. And we have working with those transnational students and mononational teachers. We have mononational teachers, monolingual teachers working with transnational and bilingual students. We need to fill the gap, preparing and working with teachers in terms of developing bilingual skills and by transnational skills also.
I like that the issue in Mexico is there's no issue. That's very true. So we get the issue on the table. So yeah, I would say I would just add two things, and I kind of already talked about this, but I'll talk about it across both nations. So first is teacher education. First of all, teachers cannot be preparing students to be citizens, and I use the term citizens very loosely, but in schools they talk about citizens a lot, citizens of where they're living, right? We have to prepare students to live global transborder lives, right? And so just that framework is not something that teachers, I think, in either nations come to education with. So I think we need to teach about immigration and cyclical migration within teacher education programs. I think we have to start there because yes, we can go into the schools, but it's very hard. There's no time when there's not much time for professional development. So I mean, it's a both and, but definitely within teacher education programs. And I hope Dr. Zúñiga talks about the book that they have coming out for Mexican teachers, because I think it's just a gem and something that we need much more of. He should talk about that. And then I think we need bilingual education. But when I say bilingual education, I'm not just talking about language. I'm talking about bilingual education as programs where students bring their whole self, bring their cultural backgrounds, their practices. And it's not like a month or a special day where we talk about it, but it's like, it's our lives and we talk about it all the time. And in the US, we do have public education, bilingual education programs, not nearly enough. And as I said, not nearly focused for the students that need it most and who it was created for. But in Mexico, bilingual education programs cannot just be for the rich, right? And English, and when they have English teachers, those teachers need to actually speak English, right? So I think that is a resource that students who had lived in the US are bringing, and they're capitalizing on that. But it's also a resource that the students have, right? And it's like, how do you address this? Because there's these tensions, right, between these students who grew up speaking English and these teachers who learned some English in their college and feel uncomfortable. And then there's so how do we create public bilingual education programs in Mexico, right, where people don't have to pay money, but that's the way, by creating these bilingual multicultural spaces, we're kind of creating a microcosm of the world, of the world that we're preparing them for. So we can't have monolingual, monocultural schools and prepare students for a multilingual, multicultural world. I know it's very easy to say that we need to do these, but they are happening, right? We find these pockets. So it's like, let's dig deeper, understand what's happening, and then let's invest and blow it up a little bit more, or a lot more, blow it. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, both of your answers conduce to the other question that we have prepared, on which you have already, kind of comment. So let me. The question is, how would you say migrant children's personal and cultural experiences can contribute to enrich the learning environment for non-migrant children in their schools, both Mexico and the US? And so you have talked, we need to transition from the deficit model to the resource assets model, right? That's the overall paradigm. But I wonder whether you can unpack a little bit, how would that work in different school settings in Mexico and the US? Because from your presentation seems that even though that the problems that they are challenges and problems that they are migrant children confronting are different in both countries, right? Tatiana, you have talked about that there are some programs, some work, others don't work, but some might be adequate, others are not. But in Mexico, what Victor is saying is that the children are invisible, right? So if they are invisible, you can have policies. So I wonder whether you can a little bit aterrizar in Spanish, unpack a little bit how would be look like in the schools to transition from that to see children as assets, what they bring to the classroom, they can share with not just with the teachers but other students in the school.
Very quickly, Christian, I am working in those weeks and the next weeks with 55 teachers of Nuevo León, discussing the ways we need to start for responding to the needs to transnational students. I mean students coming from the US to Nuevo León, and indigenous children coming from Oaxaca, Veracruz, San Luis Potosí, Hidalgo, etc. It is a very interesting group because they have discussions between them, and the teachers who are working with indigenous students. They are bilingual. They speak Nahuatl, Huasteco, Tenec, etc., Otomi, etc. So in that discussion, I am discovering that it is very, very, very hard for teachers and probably for human beings to move from deficit model to a set model. It is very difficult. And I am going to give you one example. One of our linguistics in our group, the name of her is Catalina Panait, explained that one boy in a school in Nuevo León, when she asked him to write Monterrey, he wrote Monterrey. Why he wrote Monterrey? Because in English, there are at least 4 different ways to write a Monterrey. And one thing is I, hi, they, etc. In Spanish, there is only one way to write it. In English, there are at least 4 different. So when the teachers started the discussion, they were they insisted in the correct writing. We need to teach the correct writing, whatever that means, correct writing. And I was at a moment I wanted to talk, and I told them, Catalina told us that bilingual students have a bigger inventory of phonetic capacities, and bigger inventory means they have different forms of explaining, of representing this by writing. This is an asset, it's a capital. They have a bigger phonetic reference. Instead, you wanted to insist in the right writing, the correct writing. And that was for me the indicator that transiting from the deficit model to asset model is very difficult.
It's a great example. I just kind of frame that to, what we talk when we talk about bilingual education. Often the critique is it's double monolingual, right? So when it's English, it's just English, and how many words do they know in English? And when it's Spanish, it's like, how many words do they know in Spanish? But why are we looking at these kids as pieces, right? When let's take all their language practices and say, wow, now these kids have more language practices, more vocabulary than their monolingual peers, although they're looked at as more as having a deficiency, right? When it's to the contrary. But that framing is so hard. I love the question about how can immigrant students or binational students help non-immigrant children understand these immigration realities. And it brought me back to a story from my own migration experiences. So I was born in what was the Soviet Union, and we came to the United States when I was almost 6 years old as political refugees because we're Jewish, and we came to escape the anti-Semitism. And coming as a 6-year-old, first of all, as a white 6-year-old, right, I was able to fit in ways that other children cannot and don't need to, right? But instead of Tatiana, I went by Tanya because it sounded more American, right? I'm US American. I never told anybody about my family that we migrated. It was like my big secret. After 2 months, I started speaking only English and not a word of Russian. When my mom would speak to me in Russian, like in a public space, I would oh my gosh, like the world is ending, right? And because I came at 6 years old, I don't speak English. Like if you hear my parents speak English, you would, often they say something and it's like, oh, where are you from, right? Because they have this Russian accent. But I don't. So I was kind of like, it was my own secret, and I fit in and I felt much better about myself. And then it was my 6th grade teacher, Ms. Chang, who invited my mom to come in and talk about our immigration experiences. And I was just like, oh, this is horrible. This is just, my whole thing is going to be blown. My cover is going to be blown. I was so embarrassed. But she came and she shared. And to my surprise, my peers thought not that it was weird, but it was interesting in a good way. And I was like, oh wait, this can be a good thing. I don't have to hide that I know another language, that I come from another culture. And I think that is the shame. And nobody told me within 2 months, stop speaking Russian, try to Americanize your name, act this way. Don't tell people, nobody explicitly told me that as a 6-year-old, but I got it, and I'm just average, right? But I got it. And that's what we do in the United States to children. And I think in Mexico, we can even flip it and say the same thing, right? That you just try to fit in. We know that some students don't like to speak English because they're teased for it or something like that. But in the United States, students try to fit into this mold. and I was able to fit into it, but not all students can. But more importantly, why should they, right? They bring so much richness and resources, and they can bring their whole selves to the class. And when you bring your whole self, you're not worried about hiding who you are, but you can actually focus on learning. So I think if teachers can, from the very beginning, bring that out, and having students share and read stories and connect to other cultures and languages, that can become the norm, not the exception, right? And then students grow up, like we have students in New York City from Honduras who are Garifuna. They're Black. People are often confused, like, are they Honduran? Are they, they speak Spanish, they speak Garifuna. They don't tell anybody, right? We have students who come from Mexico that speak indigenous languages. They don't tell anyone. Sometimes in Mexico, they don't tell anyone either, right? So I think it's just like creating this culture, but it's a mind shift, right? It's not like, oh, let's just change the curriculum. Changing the curriculum is not that hard, maybe a little expensive, but it's not that hard. But changing mindsets is so hard, and we're brainwashed with this. So we have a long way to go, but like I said, these things are happening in schools, and we just need to, start from that place and really understand the good moments that are happening and expand them.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Victor, very much. I turn it now to my colleague here at the Latin American Institute, Veronica Zavala. She's the outreach coordinator and responsible for these kinds of programs and seminars that we're organizing for K through 12 teachers. And she's going to lead us in the rest of the discussion. I encourage the members of the audience, people who are watching this webinar, to write their questions in the Q&A tool of the webinar. Veronica.
Thank you, Dr. Ruben Hernandez Leon. I just want to start by saying thank you, both of our great speakers, great presentations, both of you. Thank you for sharing your work, for doing this kind of work, that it's a challenge to do this kind of research, and it's such a timely manner. And I just want to acknowledge your efforts for making an impactful change at many different levels. And we do have a few questions in Spanish in our chat. So I'm going to start with the first one. So for the first one, it's in Spanish. It's a question for Dr. Zúñiga. ¿Qué instituciones de educación superior en México están actualmente preparando a futuros docentes en temas de educación transfronteriza?
I think Mario is living in Tijuana or Mexicali or Ciudad Juárez, because the notion of transborder education is singular of people living very close to the border. So in my knowledge and my experience, there are only two higher education institutions in Mexico preparing teachers, bilingual teachers, for working with transnational students. One of these institutions is the Universidad Autónoma de Nayarit. I'm really impressed for discovering this. This is Applied Linguistic Institute, and they are offering a 4 years program, licenciatura in applied linguistics. They discovered one thing that is really very valuable, very important. It's a finding, very important finding, because they were working for 20 years in the bilingual education for students in Nayarit, that is Wixárika language and Cora language. They were working in this. They have an expertise, the big expertise with the Universidad de Guadalajara in studying Wixárika and Cora. However, they discovered that another language that is part of the Mexican students' experience, like indigenous language is English. English is also a language of Mexican students arriving to Nayarit from the U.S. schools. That's why they started this program. The other institution is la Universidad Fronteriza de Baja California. No es universidad, sorry. La Escuela Normal Fronteriza de Baja California is working with some school districts of Los Angeles, California, and San Diego, California, in preparing in the preparation of bilingual teachers able to work in bilingual environments in the Baja classrooms.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zúñiga. And then the next, I think this is more of a comment from Ángel Landa in Spanish as well. Considero que los docentes deberían capacitarse tal como lo menciona el doctor Zúñiga en adquisición de lenguas extranjeras y maternas. Por ejemplo, sería interesante que tomaran en cuenta el translenguaje y la dimensión socioemocional.
My answer is very, very short. If we, I repeat this kind of answer several times, repeated in Morelos, in Baja California, Nuevo León, in Sonora, etc. If we wait to have teachers able to talk in different languages, even English, we are going to start the program of working with transnational teachers in 2040 or 2045, because the acquisition of a language, the capacity of being a competence, having the competency to be competent in a language, in a different language, takes at least 10 years. Being able to write, to read, to communicate, to listen, take 10 years, no or less than 10 years. So if we need to have teachers, bilingual teachers, talking, able to communicate in different languages, we are going to start the program in 2004, I don't know, in 25 years. So what we need to start immediately is to value, to respect bilingualism in the schools, to promote bilingualism in the schools, to be open to listen different language in my classrooms, even if I do not understand, to say to the children, being bilingual or trilingual is very good. That's, I like it very much. The presentation of my colleague, Rebecca Barriga Villanueva, who is one of the most prestigious professors in the issue of indigenous children in the Mexican schools. And she presented this morning, two models for those who knows very well the Bible stories. The two models will be very quick, very easy to take it. The model, one model is Babel model, and the other is Pentecostés model. How do you say in English Pentecostés?
Pentecostal?
Pentecostal model. And one moment, the Pentecostal model is God or the Holy Spirit give a gift to the Christian people to that gift is to understand different languages. They were able to understand. The Babel model is they do not understand each other. So what Rebecca Barriga proposes the Pentecostal model for everybody. We can understand at least a little bit the others. I like it. I like it for classrooms, at least for classrooms.
Yeah. Y quiero compartir algo de pregunta de comentario de Ángel, es acerca de translenguaje, ¿no? Yo creo que esta es la manera en donde tenemos que ir, porque como doctor Zúñiga dice, aprender un lenguaje es una jornada muy larga, pero aprender cómo podemos utilizar los idiomas de los alumnos, como las prácticas de idiomas como recursos, es algo muy importante, y ahora hay bastante libros, investigaciones acerca de qué es translenguaje, translanguaging, y con ejemplos también de cómo utilizarlo en la pedagógica cuando los maestros son bilingües y cuando no son bilingües, ¿no? Sí, es mejor si son bilingües, pero no importa. Lo que importa es centrificar los alumnos y las prácticas, lenguajes de los alumnos. Y también se conjunta con cosas socioemocional también, ¿no? Porque su lenguaje es parte de su corazón, ¿no? A veces cuando te hablas de una cosa que es más cerca de ti, es en un idioma, algo más formal, tal vez en otra. Entonces, hay maneras que podemos manejar con el multilingüismo sin tener personas que son bilingües, tiene alfabetización en los dos idiomas, sería súper bien, excelente, lo más lenguaje es lo mejor, pero tenemos que ver lo que tenemos, ¿no? Yo tengo una guía, voy a poner el link en el chat, fue de Una vida de dos países, de documental, y es una guía para maestros en México acerca de temas de cómo pueden cambiar sus prácticas en maneras pequeñas pero poderosos, ¿no? Que pueden aceptar a los alumnos más y todo su idioma, su cultura, su experiencia de migrar. Y también hay una parte socioemocional, porque es muy importante, porque inmigrar sí hay cosas muy buenas, pero hay cosas bien difíciles, ¿no? Para que the children experience.
Thank you so much for your comments, for your suggestions, and for sharing the resource, Dr. Tania. And I think we're coming out to an end. So I want to ask the panelists if there is any ending notes, any takeaway points that you would like the audience to leave with. Our audience is really mixed. We have educators, we have students, we have parents. So I think that as Dr. Zúñiga mentioned, the change can start now. We don't have to wait until we all learn another language, but what can all of us from a different points start, like maybe what can we do to contribute? I know it's a long question, but maybe like a takeaway, what can we do from a different, ahora sí que diferentes perspectivas? Tenemos padres, tenemos maestros, tenemos profesores, educadores, administradores. So whoever wants to start.
I think everyone can do something, and it doesn't have to be something big. So whether it's sharing a resource, if you're a teacher, trying a new teaching practice, giving students the opportunity to create something using all their linguistic resources, bringing in literature that talks about migration in all the different forms. So I think just think about all the things we've talked about, and what is one small thing you can do just to kind of plant the seed and do something, right? You don't have to start a bilingual school, right? You could just do something small, depending en su papel en nuestro mundo.